What's up, everybody? It's Sunny with Bottom Split, and I'm here with a hardware review. I'm going to crank this out super quick. I actually recorded this thing like 3 times. It's because I kept discovering new stuff to share with you guys, and I'm really worried that I'm going to forget the stuff that I wanted to share with you guys in the previous versions that I recorded. But I don't want to script this because I want to be really natural when I share this stuff with you because, I feel like these sort of review videos, they come out a little bit more authentic when people just kind of improv it. They don't have like a script written out where they make sure to cram all the details in. So I'm going to try to do this under 10 or 12 minutes, but getting all the important information there. So bear with me if I make some mistakes. This right here is the Thrustmaster Formula Steering Wheel Add-on Ferrari SF1000 Edition. Now that name is a handful, but most of you are pretty familiar with this product. I mean, if you saw the title in the video, you already know exactly what I'm going to talk about. But why am I reviewing it now, right? It came out in July, April, July. It had a lot of dates. Thrustmaster announced it back in April last year, and then it came out, I think reviewers started getting a hold of it in July. Some of you, if you were super lucky, you could get it in August. I haven't been able to get it since last month, and a lot of you are still trying to get a hold of it even now. It was reviewed a year ago, but why am I reviewing it, now? Like it's been a year since it was announced. What's the big deal? Why talk about it? Well, the first reason is that because it's been so long since it came out, I feel like a lot of the reviews that are out there might not have a lot of the recent information about how this wheel has changed. Thrustmaster has released updates to the firmware. They've released updates to the supported games. When it first came out, the screen only worked with Formula One 2020, with Formula One 2021 being more or less like a shoe-in for support. But a lot of people were like, what about Assetto Corsa? What about Assetto Corsa Competizione? What about PC racing sims? A lot of people had questions about that, whether or not it was going to be supported in a lot of other racing games as time went on. The other big reason is because Gran Turismo 7 came out, and I know that some of you might be wondering, how's this wheel with Gran Turismo 7? It's a Formula wheel, but is it good for other types of cars? Can you use it with Gran Turismo 7? Does the screen actually work with Gran Turismo 7? So I thought that maybe, since it's been so long, maybe these updates to the software and the support is interesting to you. The other reason that I think it's good to talk about it now is because you might be wondering, has the stock situation improved? And if it hasn't improved, has the scalping situation settled down? So without further ado, let's get into it and let's talk about this wheel. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is it seems like a lot of people are not familiar with what this actually is. So SF1000, the names, it sounds really cool, but what it represents is that Ferrari's Formula One 2020 car was actually called the SF1000. Like this year, I think it's called the F75. And then previous years there was like the SF50, the SF90. So basically right now they have the SF75, but at the time that this wheel is based on, that season was the SF1000 car. And it was called that because in the 2020 season, it was the 1000th Grand Prix that Scuderia Ferrari's Formula One team entered. A Grand Prix is a racing event in Formula One. So to celebrate the 1000th entry, they named the car SF1000, and then Thrustmaster had a partnership with them to release this steering wheel. So this steering wheel is, for all intents and purposes, it's a pretty close replica of the SF1000 steering wheel that's inside the car. It's not a one-to-one, obviously, because the real Formula wheel is probably worth I want to say at least 10,000 euros. So for something that's $350, it's pretty close, but it's not, of course, one-to-one. So having said that, I'm going to talk really quickly. The stuff that I'm not going to talk about is just a general review of the wheel itself. There's a lot of other people who gave reviews about it, so I'm not going to talk about that stuff. I'm going to talk about the stuff that's relevant to you if you're just like me and you want to buy this wheel to use it. So I think that's the important information. I didn't get this thing for free. I bought it myself, so I had to go through the difficulty of getting it for MSRP. So I can certainly empathize with the people who haven't been able to get it, and this isn't like a content creator review. So what I'm going to talk about is the pros and cons that I've experienced using this wheel in 2022 over the last few weeks. And then, I'm going to tell you, do I think it's a good deal? Do I think you should just, sit around waiting and refreshing your browser to try to get it? What it's like to use this with some of the more modern racing sims. So I'm not going to talk about the Formula One games. Just assume that the best experience you can get with this wheel is with the Formula One games. I don't really play them. So I wouldn't really be the best authority on it. There's a lot of other sim racers that play Formula One a lot. They can offer you a lot of feedback on it. But what I am going to talk about is console compatibility, and especially I'm going to talk about Automobilista 2, Assetto Corsa Competizione on both PC and console, and then of course Gran Turismo 7. So right off the bat, you're going to have to update the firmware on this wheel if you want to use it with your PlayStation 5 and Gran Turismo 7 or Assetto Corsa Competizione. So you're going to have to upgrade the firmware while the wheelbase is attached to your computer, and then once your wheelbase's firmware is updated, you're going to have to update the firmware on the steering wheel separately, and you have to do it in that order. And once you update the firmware on both, then the wheel will be supported on the latest racing games on your console. So once I had all that done and I connected it to my console and I used it in Gran Turismo 7, I was surprised that the telemetry data does work for the most part. Now, Gran Turismo 7's telemetry data is not that great. You only get like the RPM, the shift lights work, and you get like the speed, but you don't get any other really useful information like your lap times or your deltas or how much fuel you have left or what your tire temperatures are like. None of that information is there. And that's not Thrustmaster's fault. That's kind of a limitation of Gran Turismo 7's telemetry data. And you can't resolve this with Wi-Fi, so that's just the way it is. Now, having said that, I will say that the support for Gran Turismo 7 is pretty good, and I was surprised at how well it works. Out of the box, it has a button configuration that's pretty usable. You're able to adjust brake bias, and you're able to adjust, I believe, like your traction control levels and your engine map with the rotary encoders, and you have enough buttons that you're using to be able to do all the things that you need to do inside of Gran Turismo 7. I will say that I don't think that this is a very strong wheel for Gran Turismo 7 because there's a lot of like production domestic cars in Gran Turismo 7, and the amount of cars that you drive that are open wheel in Gran Turismo 7, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of them. So if you need something with 30 centimeters of diameter, then this wheel is going to feel pretty limited. Assetto Corsa Competizione on PlayStation 5, it actually was supported very, very well. Like you get a lot of information on the screen. I was pretty surprised about that because even though it's Assetto Corsa Competizione, it is on console. But apparently, you know, Kunos and Thrustmaster, they really hit it out of the park with you getting as much data as possible over the USB connection on PlayStation 5 because you get everything. You get tire temperatures, you get fuel, you get the delta between the person that's in position in front of you and the person that's in a position behind you. You also get like lap times along with all the, you know, the immediately important information like your RPM lights and your speed and stuff like that. Now, I will say that I did have a hard time looking at the screen while I was using it because, you know, you're looking up at the TV and then you're looking down at the screen. I'll talk about that more later, but the information is definitely there. So if you're somebody who's really good at racing and looking at the LCD screen, I will say that there's a lot of information there. And also, pretty much all of the buttons and all of the encoders work on PlayStation 5 and Assetto Corsa Competizione. And with ACC, you can actually map the buttons to custom functions. So with Gran Turismo 7, you're kind of limited to what you can do. I know that I think there's a custom button mapping feature, but more or less you're going to want to use the configuration out of box. But with ACC, you can control everything. You can even set different force feedback settings. You can set like different button maps, and there's all kinds of cool stuff that you can do with ACC. And also, unlike I think when I first played Assetto Corsa Competizione on PlayStation 4, I couldn't control the field of view. I think it was very limited in what you could do with the camera settings. But with Assetto Corsa Competizione, the PS5 version, there is view settings. I don't know if they updated it recently, but there is view settings and you can update the field of view. So that's unrelated to this wheel review, but I just thought, you know, it was important information to have. But yeah, in terms of the wheel itself, the pros, aside from the LCD screen, which I just talked about, is that it has a lot of functions. You know, it has encoders, it has thumb encoders, it has front encoders, and all of them are functional, unlike the previous Formula One wheel, and they have a really solid indentation to them. The other thing is that the shifters just feel really nice. When I was using it, I was surprised at how good the shifters feel. They feel much better than the McLaren GT3 shifters. They have a real nice, like, tactile click to them. And it's also a push-pull configuration, which even some more expensive Formula wheels don't have, which means that you can shift up and down with just one hand. You can push back to shift the other direction and then pull to shift that direction. And it also has analog paddles. On console, at least, it doesn't support setting them to gas and brake, but I mean, they are there. I'm pretty sure you can configure them as separate axis on a PC. The thumb encoders are nice. The shift lights are nice. The buttons themselves have a nice tactility to them. I want to say they're halfway between maybe like the McLaren GT3 wheel and like the Club Sport wheel. They're probably pretty similar to the McLaren GT3 wheel. It's been a while since I used it, but I remember those buttons being pretty similar to this. There are a couple of buttons on the GT3 wheel that feel really, really good. I think it's like the big buttons. They have like a really nice strong tactile click to them. There's no buttons on here that are similar to that, but the encoders themselves definitely feel nicer than the McLaren GT3 encoders. And the best part is the price, right? If you can get it for MSRP, it's only 350 bucks, which I think is pretty cool. If you can get it for that price. Again, I'm going to talk about that later. The other cool thing is how easy it is to use. This part really surprised me. Once I updated the firmware, I just plugged it in, and immediately I got all of the information on the screen. And that was not just for PlayStation, but also for PC. Now, if for those of you who haven't used a wheel that has an LCD screen on it before, I've used a Cube Control CSX2, I've used the Gomez Sim Industries steering wheel, and I've also used like a Sim Hub and a Z1 Dash. And I can tell you that when you have to set those things up, it takes such a long time to set everything up and to get everything dialed in and to get everything working. Like I bought an eSports Sim steering wheel, which I'm going to review later, and it has a Z1 Dash compatible screen on it. And even though that wheel is a much higher level than this wheel, and it's certainly a very nice wheel, the PDF to explain how to set it up is 31 pages long. So you just have to understand that from a casual racer perspective, if you just want to plug in a wheel, you get a pretty screen that shows you some nice information. This thing is super easy to use. So for casual racers, people who don't really want to spend a lot of time finicking and tinkering with their hardware, I would say that the screen on this is really nice. It's proprietary and that has its own cons. I'm going to talk about those later, but it's still really nice knowing that this thing is just, you just plug it in and it's just good to go. I was also surprised at how good it looks. You know, it really looks nice. You think of Thrustmaster as being like this low range, entry-level sim racing hardware company, and they released this wheel. It's just gorgeous. You know, it has really nice grips. It has this carbon fiber front. You know, it says Thrustmaster on the back. It's got like nice little, this like brushed aluminum surface that it uses for the shifters and the paddles. These clutch paddles feel way nicer than the McLaren GT3 paddles on the Fanatec wheel. And you know, it's Ferrari themed. If you're a big Formula One fan, this is a really nice wheel to have if you're using a Thrustmaster wheelbase. And it's also compatible with all of the Thrustmaster wheelbases, the T-Series bases, T300, TX, and all the TS and TGT and all that stuff. So yeah, you know, overall there's a lot of really good sides of this. But unfortunately, I've got to talk about the cons a little bit. Now, full disclosure, my cons are highly subjective, and a lot of you aren't going to really agree with them. I want to say just try to keep in mind that if you had an easy time buying this steering wheel, try to think about the perspective of other people who have been waiting for months to get a hold of this and why some of these cons might be problematic. So let's start with the first con, which is the build quality. Unfortunately, I have to say Thrustmaster certainly, like they went above and beyond expectations with releasing this thing to begin with. The screen and all that stuff that I talked about is all really nice, but unfortunately they made a few, I want to say, engineering errors that are going to give you headaches down the line. The first big one, well, it's big and it's kind of big. It's annoying that you have to go through this, but the shifters have this adhesive pad underneath them that goes over the magnet, and it's meant to be there to make sure that the contact is sort of a lot more subtle. And that adhesive pad, unfortunately, it slides out of place. I'm not the only person that this has happened to. A lot of people have said that this has happened to them. To me, it happened after only a few days. One of the shifter adhesive pads just came loose and slid down a little bit, and it was exposed, and I had to use some tweezers to get it and to sort of relocate it back to the magnet. The other annoying part of it is that the adhesive is strong, but apparently it's not strong enough to keep it in place, but it's strong enough that when you have to get it to move it, to put it back in place, there's a lot of resistance to it, and you might scratch your shifter housing, and also you might just have some difficulty moving it around because the space underneath the shifter paddle it's like less than a millimeter of space, so it's really tough to sort of get some tweezers in there. And unfortunately, that's not my only complaint about the shifter housing. The other complaint that I have is that while the shifters themselves are made out of aluminum or some sort of brushed metal, and the front of the wheel is made out of like this nice carbon fiber, the shifter housing, like the component, the shifter component itself that plugs into the wheel, it's made out of plastic. And the issue is that it has flex. It has these 4 tiny screws that you use to hold it in place. And as much as I tried to tighten it really hard. I tried making sure that it was tightened in even lengths on all 4 sides. I tried doing it like crisscross, like the way that you would tighten up the lug nuts on your wheel, on your car wheel when you're replacing your tires. There's all these things that I tried to do, and no matter what I did, there was still a little bit of flex in the shifter housing itself, It was so bad that it was actually not just visibly noticeable, but it was also audibly noticeable. So you could see it, you could hear it, and you could feel it, which is probably the worst combination of flex. And I tend to be a little bit sensitive to this stuff, but I will say that you most likely won't notice it. But every now and then, if you have your hands resting on the shifter and you just kind of give a little bit of pressure, not enough to click, but just like, oh, I'm holding onto the shifters, you might hear like a squeaking noise and you might see it flexing a little bit. And the reason why I think that this is a problem is because, this is the flex that you have right now, and over time, as you start, if you have to remove those screws and then put them back in, I feel like the flex could get worse. I mean, if it's this bad, and I've only had this wheel for a couple of weeks, it's definitely going to get worse as time goes on. And the other reason why that flex is an issue is sort of a segue into my final con, which is it's just really bad user experience design. Thrustmaster, they require you to update the firmware for this wheel in order to get updates for the latest games. So let's say, hypothetically, Gran Turismo's developers decide to add more telemetry data and Thrustmaster implements it and then they update the screen. Unfortunately, you can't update the wheel while it's mounted to the wheelbase. You have to plug it into a USB cable and then plug that USB cable into your computer. And Thrustmaster had the idea to place that USB port underneath the shifter housing, which means that you have to take that squeaky flexing shifter housing off every time you want to update the firmware for the wheel, which means that you're only going to make that flexing situation worse every time you remove those 4 screws. There's another issue, and I'm not sure how big of a deal it is, but when I was using this steering wheel and I was trying to get some test footage for Assetto Corsa Competizione, the screen froze. I was in the middle of just like a really quick 5-minute race against the AI, and sometime in between the lap, I just noticed that the screen stopped moving, like the RPMs and the shift lights, all of it was just frozen. The button still worked and force feedback still worked, so I could still continue to race, but it threw me off a second because I got worried that the wheel died. Other people have said that this wheel died, and so I got worried that the wheel died, so I immediately, I panicked, I shut down the recording, I unplugged the wheelbase and plugged everything back in. And fortunately, after I reset everything, the wheel screen came back to life. But it's still a little bit troubling because if you depend on the information that's on that screen, then if it freezes in the middle of like an endurance race or an online competition race, you have no choice. You just have to just leave it like that. And it could distract you and maybe cause you to crash. And if you're the type of person to say, well, you don't really need the information on the screen anyway, so who cares if it freezes? Well, if that's the case, then you shouldn't go through this much trouble to buy a wheel that has an LCD screen, right? I mean, either you want it or you don't want it. And if you do want it, then it freezing in the middle of a race is probably not going to be a very good thing, right? And the last point that I want to bring up that's a major con, and this is not surprising because most of you know this already, is that the stock situation is just really, really bad. Thrustmaster has not been doing a good job at trying to combat scalpers, and I feel like they could do a lot more with it, but they haven't. So the stock situation has not improved. You can't buy this thing in the US, Canada, or Japan, which was where I was before I came to California. I was not able to find it at MSRP in any of those places. I had to buy it from Europe in order to get it for MSRP and ship it all the way from over there. And even then, it wasn't available for shipping on the day that I ordered it. I had to put in a pre-order and then wait for it to get in stock, and then they shipped it to me. So the scalping price has settled down. When it first came out, it was like $1,500, but the stock situation definitely hasn't improved to the point where you could get it for MSRP, but it has settled down to the point where you could get it on Amazon for like $540 or something like that. Like, I don't recommend you do that, but that is an issue. And that combined with the potential reliability issues, like if the screen dies, if the shifter housing just gets really squeaky and loose and you decide you need to get it replaced, just keep in mind that if Thrustmaster doesn't have this thing in stock, you could be without it for weeks or maybe even months. I imagine months would not be out of the realm of impossibility. Someone who said that their wheel died on Reddit, they said that they had to wait 2 or 3 months before they got a wheel back. And I don't know about any of you, but that would bother me a lot. To the point that I would just probably ditch Thrustmaster's ecosystem entirely. Because if you need a whole extra steering wheel so that you can wait for your RMA to come back, then what was the point of even buying this steering wheel to begin with? The last con, and this really doesn't have a lot to do with the wheel itself, but the last con is that Thrustmaster kind of dropped the ball with releasing a wheelbase that's compatible with this steering wheel. So 2021, they did release a new wheelbase, the T248, but they decided to make it like the T150 where the steering wheel can't be taken off. I don't know why they did that. I feel like if you're going to release a new wheelbase the same year that you release a new steering wheel, it's just a smart idea marketing wise to like put them together. But Thrustmaster just decided to price block people from getting a quick release, so they have to buy a more expensive wheelbase that is also like much older and also much better because it has a full belt drive. So basically, they released the T248 and they released the steering wheel and said, but don't buy the T248 because if you want to use it, you should use the T300, which is older. It just convolutes the product line and makes it really confusing for new people that are trying to join and get into it. So I'll say, you know, like if you don't have any Thrustmaster hardware at all, don't buy Thrustmaster hardware specifically to get this steering wheel. You know, maybe consider the other alternatives like Fanatec or Direct Drive because, you know, like, first of all, you might not be able to get a hold of the steering wheel anyway. And even if you do, if it breaks or if something happens, you might have to send it back and who knows how long it's going to be until you get a replacement. And, you know, like these are all issues that you're going to have to deal with, along with the fact that, you know, hey, this Thrustmaster ecosystem, it's getting old. The quick release is really annoying to use. It's just, it takes so long to screw on that plastic hub. And then you have to use a screwdriver and you have to damage your wheel by scoring the bottom with a Phillips screw in order to hold it in place. And if you don't, it's going to come loose while you're driving. So, you know, like I want to say that the wheel is very nice, but I hope that the rest of Thrustmaster's product line will catch up to it. So yeah, those are the cons, and that's it for the video. I don't think I'm going to use this wheel full time as my primary wheel. I'm probably going to keep it in the closet just so I can test it out whenever it gets updated. But you know, hey, if you're looking for a way to get it for MSRP, just shoot me a comment, shoot me an email. I want to say if I feel like you might be a scalper, then I'm not going to tell you how I got it for MSRP. But yeah, if you need to get it for MSRP and you're legit, then let me know and I'll help you buy it. But yeah, that's the review, guys. Overall, I've got to say that I give this product a thumbs medium. Yeah, it's really awesome. Don't get me wrong. Like, and if you love this wheel and you haven't had any problems with it, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to offend you, and I'm glad that you like it. I do agree that it's a great wheel, but the cons are real. They're there. You shouldn't discount them. One last thing is that if you're buying this wheel because you see it and you think like, oh, this thing looks like one of those really high-end steering wheels that, you know, the YouTubers use and all that stuff. Just keep in mind that this wheel was built for the sake of being profitable at a price tag of $349. So don't expect it to compete with like the CSX2 and, you know, like the Cube Controls wheels and like the Gomez Sim Industries wheels. You know, temper your expectations and understand that you're getting a really great value, but there are some areas where you have to sort of temper your expectations because it is a really affordable wheel. Now, I know $350 is a lot of money, but what I mean is compared to the wheels that normally how much they cost when they come with features like this, you should understand that Thrustmaster had to cut a few corners in order to make it affordable like this. But I do think that they did a pretty good job. I just hope that they'll fix out these reliability issues, the build quality issues, the stock issues, and, you know, I hope that they finally release that direct drive that they've been talking about, sort of, for the last year or so, because all the other manufacturers are just, they're running away from Thrustmaster right now. This is all Thrustmaster has, you know, really to get you into their ecosystem. So in my opinion, you know, hey, come on, Thrustmaster, let's step it up, you know. Or should I say, is Thrustmaster asleep at the wheel? Sorry, I had to do it. But thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time. I have a really awesome steering wheel that I'm going to review that looks very similar to this. So I hope you guys will tune in for that.